As a continuation from the previous session, today we are going to start from reference nutrient intakes. So this reference nutrient intake is a parameter that helps us to identify how much minimum amount of nutrient, in this case vitamins, are required by an individual. So this gives a plot. The information derived in this plot is basically acquired by conducting a series of experiments for different age groups and population and gender, and they have arrived at a kind of bell curve which gives you the right amount of vitamins that is required. So if you look at this bell curve, you find it here, the average requirement. So you do have two tail ends of the bell curve, one on the lower threshold intake and the other on the higher threshold intake. So people might think taking nutrients, especially vitamins, in a sustained amount, in a larger doses, would really help them. Actually, it's not so, because every vitamin, if it's taken below the acceptable limit and above the acceptable limit, is going to really cause pathology for the individual, and that pathology requirements will vary. For example, if you consider the vitamin folic acid. So folic acid is an essential vitamin. We are going to see about folic acid in detail when we are going to do the section under B vitamins, but now I thought it will be appropriate to cite this example so that you can crystallize this idea of how this reference nutrient intake works. So let's say for folic acid is an essential vitamin, and it's one of the essential vitamins required for blood formation, the RBCs. And you know, folic acid, normally we don't take an extra dose of folic acid. If you are going to eat a balanced diet, you have sufficient amount of folic acid, especially if the balanced diet is rich in vegetables, you don't have any problem. And but the amount of folic acid suddenly increases during term pregnancy. So that's why during term pregnancy, the government has made it mandatory that the pregnant women, and even during the reproductive years, they have to take double the dose of folic acid. Suppose if the folic acid intake is going to fall within this range of average requirement, as you see over there in this curve, during term pregnancy, it's going to be a real problem, because it will directly affect the fetal development of nervous tissue. So the child might even born mentally retarded. So this is an example where the average requirement slightly gets modified during term pregnancy. But in a normal individual with an average age cited, the requirement of folic acid would remain the same. But we need to have or look for certain deficiency symptoms, and if we find folic acid requirements are less, for example exfoliation of epithelial cells or kind of breaking up of epithelial cells, then we know for sure that there is a need for folic acid. So you may ask, like, how we will really know that this is the average requirement? That's why this average requirement is being done through rigorous experiments in different populations. In fact, every nutritional society or nutritional body in a country have to do an ethnic study of reference nutrient intakes according to the population or the ethnic population of the country, and they recommend a dose, and all the food products and nutrient products which comes out of the country or in that particular geographical area would always try to fix within the nutritional requirement details provided by the guidelines. Now we are going to go on with one more concept, what we call it like protective nutrient intake. So you may ask, what is this protective nutrient intake? So earlier I told you, you don't need to take too much or you don't need to go below the required level, so you end up in trouble. But sometimes certain nutrients you end up taking more. So that's what we mean by protective nutrient intake. See, look at this definition, it's very interesting. The concept of protective nutrient intake was introduced in some cases to refer to an amount greater than the RNI. So that's the point what I'm trying to bring over here. So RNI is the accepted standard. Suppose if somebody asks you, what is the amount of vitamin, a particular vitamin A or particular vitamin D that you have to consume, you can always look into the table of RNI for that particular geographical region, the backed up table, well authenticated table, and you can straight away say this is the requirement. But suppose there are cases where you deliberately end up taking more amount of this particular vitamin, and that's what we mean by protective nutrient intake. So I can give you an example, because with an example you can understand it better. So look at these fruits, bright colored ones. So if you look at all these fruits, you have one thing in common. All these fruits are basically kind of citrus fruits, okay, the fresh ones. And all these fresh citrus fruits have this particular vitamin C in a very high quantity. Now if you actually look at a person taking vitamin C, we might consider the amount of vitamin C might be almost required within the RNI limits. But suppose if the person has to undergo a stressful work, or if the person has to work in a stressful environment, maybe a physical stress, or probably the person is already under some kind of diseases or is undergoing some therapy, the physician would recommend the patient to take additional doses of vitamin C. So this additional dose sometimes may go way beyond the RNI limit. So that's what we mean by protective nutrient intake. So this vitamin C taken may not only help in its own way of modifying and helping the metabolism as it used to do, but will also aid in the absorption of other vitamins. See, look here, not only vitamins and minerals. Suppose if the intake of vitamin C is going to be less, the absorption of iron would be in trouble. If you notice, people who suffer from anemia, most of the preparations which have been dispensed for anemia will contain iron preparations and folic acid, and to improve the bioavailability, improve the availability of vitamin, iron, mineral and other vitamin, folic acid, the product would also recommend taking an additional dose of vitamin C. The reason is vitamin C would enhance the absorption of iron. Not only that, vitamin C has antioxidant property, and it helps in replenishing the tissues when there is excessive stress related free radical damage to the tissues. So this is an excellent example of protective nutrient intake. Maybe I would like to cite the case of Linus Pauling. So Linus Pauling is a Nobel laureate. He's a Nobel laureate who got twice the prize. One, the Nobel laureate prize in chemistry, and the other one he got a Nobel laureate prize for peace. He lived up to more than 90 years, and he had this habit of taking excess amount of vitamin C. In fact, he says take more than a gram of vitamin C per day and you will have an enhanced longevity. So this is one case which is basically protective nutrient intake. Sometimes the protective nutrient intake can go to a level where it can lead to pathology. So we have to be little careful about this concept of protective nutrient intake, and we should rely only on those aspects where we need to consider specifically how individual nutrient needs to be monitored depending on the requirement of vitamins. Now we move on with the second concept. Here is basically the protective nutrient intake. This gives basically a kind of a table or rather a pyramid. This has been published by the Spanish Society of Community Nutrition. It's been published in a journal called Nutrien. So this society, Spanish Society of Nutrition, has given a kind of empirical pyramid. So this empirical pyramid gives an indication as to what kind of protective nutrient intake can be practiced. See, for example, this table, this pyramid refers more or less to a kind of a balanced diet, and if you carefully look at different levels, they give you there is this lower platform in the pyramid which speaks about all the diets which would provide calories, essential calories required, and as you go further you find the protein rich diet, and as you go further up in the pyramid you look for more fresh, quick calorie related foods. As if you go down the pyramid, you find all those food content which are naturally fortified with vitamins. Suppose if we are going to invert this pyramid and only supplement the calorie intake and does not care about the vitamin intake, then definitely there's going to be a huge pathological condition coming up. So in fact, the modern diet has somehow reversed this process and has led to a lot of dietary related diseases. So the protective nutrient intake is basically when we do processed food, especially processed food is an output of modern food technology. The reason is when we have already overcome the barrier of making sufficient amount of food to meet the needs of the society. Now in this case, the excess food, whatever that is being prepared, needs to be transported, needs to be catered around to different parts where the food production would be less. So in that case, we need to do the study of incorporating all those essential nutrients, taking into consideration the protective nutrient intake. So this kind of fortified vitamins would really enrich the food product, not only adding value to the food product, but would also ensure the food product itself would act like a kind of a preventive or a prophylactic medication in protecting the individual against deficiency diseases. Because most of the diseases, especially deficiency diseases, can actually make an individual more prone for lifestyle diseases. In fact, there is a study. If you look at carefully this kind of a pyramid, you understand the metabolism of carbohydrate is heavily dependent on the sustained intake of nutrients, especially vitamins. If there is malabsorption of essential vitamins, especially vitamins in the B class, this will contribute further to the degenerative changes of lifestyle diseases. For example, diabetes, if you consider, diabetes basically results from a metabolic disorder. So a metabolic disorder can be attributed to genetic factors as well as to dietary factors. If a diet would be there that's enriched only with let's say high calorie intake and high calorie fatty acid substances, then the person eventually develops tolerance to this hormone insulin, and once tolerance to insulin happens, then this becomes a big problem where the person will not be able to utilize the amount of calories available, although the calorie intake could not diminish over a period of time. Now in such cases, their ability to process vitamins would also be hampered. So one reason is that any food, maybe you could take it like a kind of a thumb rule, any food intake which is rich in natural vitamins would also have a inherently balanced calorific intake. But if a food has been processed only for calorie, then and if it's not been completely taken care for the fortified balanced vitamins, that can completely modify all the nutrient abilities of the food. Now if you go further, we are going to look at an overview of the vitamins, especially the terminology connected with that. In the previous session, we were looking into the terminology of vitamins as such. Now in this session, I am going to introduce you to the overall classification of vitamin. So in the coming sessions, we would do exclusively one vitamin at a time, understanding the significance of each vitamin in detail and the way this vitamin would have an impact on our system. So now look at this table. It's an interesting table, and this is a comprehensive list. So people do keep discovering some sub-isotype varieties of vitamin chemicals, but this is a comprehensive list, and this comprehensive list gives you the overall vitamin that is normally needed or that is essential for the metabolic process. So in the previous session, I told you about water soluble vitamin and fat soluble vitamin. Now we look here into the details, the technical details on the terminology. So let's start with fat soluble vitamin. So when you say fat soluble vitamin, it attributes to the physicochemical property of the vitamin. So this vitamin series are hydrophobic in nature. So they are insoluble in water, because all of these vitamins that come under the category of fat soluble vitamins possess an organic molecule, and this imparts hydrophobic nature to them. And this is an advantage because of its hydrophobicity, and being a fat soluble vitamin, they have a better half-life and they withstand processing. That's one of the reasons most of the cooking oils find it easy to incorporate fat soluble vitamins, whereas if you have to incorporate water soluble vitamins, it becomes a challenge. Until you're going to make an emulsion, it would be very difficult. Now we look at fat soluble vitamins. Let's start with vitamin A. The technical name for vitamin A is retinol, and you look over here, the retinol group of compounds, here we have the chemical structure of the vitamins. So I'll go back and forth on these slides so that you can have a view, the chemical view of each vitamin, although we are going to do them elaborately in the coming sessions. Look at this picture. Can you see the benzene ring, and you have a very lengthy hydrophobic tail. So the very structure gives an indication that this molecule is hydrophobic in nature, and vitamin A, retinol, is extremely essential in forming the visual purple. So our ability to really process light is because of the photosensitive pigment present in the retina, and vitamin A is the raw material for making the visual purple. So that's one of the reasons, if vitamin A is not sufficiently provided, that leads to night blindness, and to a point, a sustained depletion of vitamin A can lead to irreversible blindness over a period of time. But it's reversible in the early days. That's one of the reasons we always consider that you need to give vitamin A as an important supplement for children, and any diet which is devoid of vitamin A could eventually lead to blindness. And one interesting thing about vitamin A deficiency is quite rare until the diet exclusively eliminates vitamin A. And we should also consider certain age population, for example children and growing adolescents need an extra dose of vitamin A because of rapid metabolism and growth that's happening in their bodies, and this exactly helps them in development of variety of components. We are going to see about vitamin A in detail. The next one is basically what we call it like cholecalciferol, which is the technical name for vitamin D. So cholecalciferol is also available as a plant source, what we call it like ergocalciferol. If you look at this picture, the next one, you find all the vitamin over here, and here you find vitamin D. Okay, so cholecalciferol, and this is an essential vitamin. The moment you think of vitamin D, think of calcium. So this is essential in calcium metabolism, calcium absorption, and this is a wonderful vitamin for development of bones. And that's why most of the preparations, the vitamin supplements available in the market commercially, will always have calcium supplements, will always be doped with vitamin D. And vitamin D deficiency has a lot to do with maintaining a normal epithelial texture of the skin. So the bone defects, the muscle defects are also attributed to vitamin D. And vitamin D's natural source is sunlight, we know that, and apart from sunlight, vitamin D can also be taken from other food sources. And let's go on with vitamin K. So vitamin K is technically called the phyloquinone, the quinone derivatives, and the moment you think of vitamin K, think of blood clotting. So if vitamin D is not there, the blood will not clot properly. So deficiency of vitamin K leads to bleeding conditions. See, there are different kinds of bleeding conditions, hemophilia, and many clinical conditions are there. So don't confuse this with the genetic diseases. Vitamin K deficiency can lead to bleeding disorders, and I would say prolonged deficiency of vitamin K can lead to lots of blood clotting issues. And you find over here all leafy green vegetables are rich in vitamin K, and here we have vitamin E, which is the tocopherol, and vitamin E is a very dense vitamin, and vitamin E has a lot to do in maintaining the tone of epithelia, and they play an essential role in fertility. And vitamin E is always used as a vehicle in dispersing other vitamins as well, and most of the skin preparations, if you consider, and for epithelial toning of skin, vitamin E is used. Although the fertility role of vitamin E has been established in animal models, they say a sustained amount of vitamin E, even in adults, human adults, helps in lots of fertility. It provides a lot of fertility benefits. So if you look at all these vitamins, vitamin A, D, E, K, nowadays in the food processing technology, all these vitamins are fortified in cooking oil, in milk, in majority of the products available, which are good source of oil rich calorific foods, and it's much easy to incorporate these food. Now let's move on with B complex vitamins. Now if you look at B complex vitamins, you can actually categorize them into two types. So vitamin C exclusively, although they come under water soluble vitamin, it's not essentially part of the B complex assembly. The reason is structurally they are different, and their role is quite different from what you would expect from the other B complex vitamins. But the non B complex vitamin C, because of its physicochemical property in terms of solubility in water, is being categorized under water soluble nature. So you remember in the previous slide I told you about protective nutrient intake, where I have explained about the role of vitamin C. I have given that example. So if you continue to look at vitamin C, all these vitamins, not only vitamin C, this entire class of water soluble vitamins are very labile for temperature. So if you look at these water soluble vitamins, you have to be very careful when you cook them. Most of the food that we cook, especially fresh vegetables, when you blanch them, when you process them, we have to be extremely careful in not losing these B soluble vitamins. In fact, B soluble vitamins have this historic reference of being the first class of vitamins to be utilized in the study of vitamin itself. So if you remember in the previous session, I told you about the Professor Hopkins and Professor Funk, who were involved in identifying the essential additional nutritive factors called vitamins. So their study historically focused on this disease called beriberi. So in the previous session I explained about beriberi. One point I thought I would explain it as an additional component for you to connect the ideas, is that vitamin B deficiency has been always associated with polished rice. So that's why you find people who take unpolished rice, especially in the agricultural societies, in villages, you find these people lack this kind of diseases, whereas it's a very common diseases in urban environments, especially urban slum areas, where people are devoid of taking any kind of polished food. Here what they did was they actually fed animals with polished rice, and they found, or they could replicate the symptoms of beriberi, and this led them to isolate one of the key vitamins, vitamin thiamine, the B1 vitamin, to be an active ingredient responsible in curing beriberi. So this was a breakthrough. In fact, this breakthrough led Professor Hopkins and his team to win the Nobel Prize, which I have mentioned earlier. Now when you associate this, immediately are associating this with the processing of food. So food processing has a lot to do in retaining vitamins and their ability to provide the essential components to be fortified in the food. So now let's look at this class of B vitamins. You have a broad class of these B vitamins. You could say those vitamins which play a direct role in metabolism. Here you have a list of thiamine, riboflavin, niacin, biotin and pantothenic acid. So all these groups of vitamins, they play a very important role in metabolism. That's why they are labeled as energy releasing vitamins. So if you closely watch them, these vitamins play an important role in modifying the process of all the metabolically active enzymes in the energy deriving pathways. In fact, you could also say that these vitamins somewhere or the other act like cofactors in the energy releasing pathways. If you look at this vitamin, which is hematopoietic in nature. So what do you mean by hematopoiesis? Hematopoiesis means the process by which a body can form blood cells. So for hemoglobin to be formed, hemoglobin to be packed inside RBCs, and to have a healthy oxygen transfer rate by RBCs, you need healthy hemoglobin. These two vitamins, folic acid and vitamin B12, are extremely essential for healthy RBCs. Deficiency of vitamin B12 or deficiency of vitamin folic acid would directly lead to anemia. So in fact, I would say these two vitamins, folic acid and vitamin B12, are always useful in restoring the anemic status. Now we move on with the other category of vitamins, what we call it like pyridoxine, pyridoxal and pyridoxamine. So these vitamins they play an essential role in neuronal related development. So even vitamin B12 is a partner in that. Doesn't mean that other vitamins, their contribution is essential, but these vitamins are key vitamins for healthy nerves. So for a quick summary for today's session, so we did a review of RNI so that we would understand the significance of dosage and how the dosage is determined for every vitamin, and the slab or the pattern in which you are able to identify the average requirement of vitamins. Then we saw what exactly this concept of protective nutrient intake is all about. Although we stick on with the RNI needs for individual vitamin, there are times, or rather there is exclusively certain vitamins we deliberately take as a means of protective health benefit. Then we also saw the overall pyramid of nutrient intake and how the nutrient intake should balance with the calorific intake, and we also had a brief overview of the classification of vitamins, water soluble and fat soluble vitamins, and we also had a little overview, and in the coming sessions I would elaborate on these individual structures and explain you in detail the role of individual vitamins. So once again I would say that this particular class of vitamins, although they are very small, structurally very insignificant in quantity compared to the calorific intake of the food that we take, but without this the entire calorific food doesn't carry any value. So finally we'll end up this session and we'll continue in the coming series of lectures. Thank you.